Welcome to our Election 2016 Forum, organized by the League of Women Voters of Greater Las Cruces. I'm Fred Martino. Today we focus on New Mexico House District 37 with Democrat Joanne Ferrary and Republican Dr. Terry McMillan. Candidates will have 1 minute to respond to each question. There will be no follow-up questions and no rebuttals, so we do ask the candidates to offer their position and refrain from commenting on their opponents. The questions were submitted to the league by the public. We asked the studio audience to refrain from any noise during the forum. We'll alternate throughout the half hour, and the first response was chosen by a coin toss. I'm joined by Erica Graff Webster, past president of the league, and she has our first question.
It's to Dr. McMillan. Do you support physician assistance in dying? Why or why not?
Thank you, Erica. This is a complex issue, and I've had occasion to give a lot of thought to it recently because I have a couple, 3 or 4 constituents that have approached me directly about this issue. We do have 2 or 3 states now that have provided legislation to allow this. I'm conflicted to a degree in that my faith as a Christian tells me that this is not something that I would choose for myself. It is not something that I would participate in. The question goes to whether or not there's such a thing as legitimate human suffering, or if there's value to human suffering. On the one hand, we euthanize our animals when they suffer, and we do it as soon as we know that there's no further value to that. So I have a conflict between my own faith-based beliefs, and I have an issue, however, with carrying that to governance, because I know we have many people who do not see things as I do and may not have or see the same value to human suffering that I do. So I think it's probably true to say that if we had the vote tonight, I would probably not support it. But it is true that the more I read and learn about it, the more I become open-minded about it. And I'm not sure that it's appropriate to transfer my own spiritual beliefs to governance.
Joanne?
I believe that this is much like women's health care issues, that government shouldn't be between the decision of the person and their family and their faith, and that someone who has a terminal illness and is suffering very much, that they should be able to make a decision as that, and that we should regulate how this would be implemented and turn to the other states that are already offering that for their constituents.
Okay, Joanne, the next question will begin with you. This is another one that is somewhat controversial. Do you support allowing voters to decide on the legal sale of recreational marijuana in New Mexico? Yes or no, and why?
It is a very interesting situation for our state. There are other states that are offering marijuana. They're legalizing it. They're making sure that it is regulated and that they make sure that it is out of the hands of young people. Much like DWI prevention and underage drinking, we should have both in tandem with the same types of laws if we do legalize it in New Mexico. It is something that does need regulating, and it could offer us a tax base, and I think the people of New Mexico should be deciding that.
Dr. McMillan.
Thank you, Fred. I'll begin by making the observation that I do not find marijuana to be as dangerous as some of the drugs that are currently available, and quite legally so. The worst drug that is on the market is nicotine. It takes the highest toll in life and cost to health care. Alcohol comes behind that. The problem that I have with legalizing marijuana is principally this, that we have no standard. There exists no standard to determine when someone is inebriated with marijuana, which means that we would have no way to control prosecuting someone who's driving while under the influence of marijuana. We have no idea when that occurs as we do with alcohol. My suggestion would be that when we have that standard in place and it's solid, and we've learned some more from the experiences of the states that have gone before us, then I would consider it, yes.
Could I take the remaining minutes that I had, or seconds?
No, I'm sorry.
Okay, Doctor, how would you provide incentives for businesses to relocate to our state, if any?
Erica, I would suggest that several steps have been taken. In recent years in your legislature, we've made some changes to state law that I think are going to be very helpful at incentivizing the migration of businesses into our community. We're beginning to see that with the Facebook installation, which the ground was broken today in Los Lunas. We've altered, and significantly altered, the tax base for manufacturers and the construction industry. And we have and are slowly rolling back corporate income taxes to the point where we should be competitive with states around us so that we can compete. One of the things that we have still to do, and we have some large tasks, and when you think about bringing a big business into Mexico, one of the things that they look at is our educational system. And we don't have a good reputation with respect to our educational system. We don't have a great record with respect to the way our legislature does business. So these are a couple of areas that need to be improved, especially with regards to our reputation in these areas.
I agree that education is a good place. We have a wonderful place to live and work, and we just need to invest in ourselves and in our future. And investing in our infrastructure is very important, as well as in our educational system, so that companies can rely on having a workforce that is educated, has vocational and also college degrees, and that is healthy. So we need to make sure that all of these things are available for companies to come into New Mexico, and also to help develop small businesses that are already here, opportunities such as growing hemp that is low water and has high productivity of food or different products. So there are things we can do that are already here. We don't need to be investing and giving big corporate tax breaks to companies that haven't proven to be successful.
This question is related but more broad than just incentives. What should the state legislature do to improve the economy in New Mexico? Joanne?
Well, we should close some of the corporate tax loopholes that have not been proven to be effective, and to also increase the capital gain so that it is more level with what middle class is paying. We also need to make sure that we have the investment on different things such as education and the infrastructure, so that the economy can grow, and that will build jobs.
Fred, an improved economy means quite simply that money that did not used to flow into Mexico now does. That's what an improved economy means. It doesn't have anything to do with transfer of resources or wealth within the state. So an improved economy means that our businesses who produce products and services are able to sell those services and products competitively outside the state, and by doing so bring money into the state. And the way we make that happen is to improve the conditions on the ground for our businesses. And that means a simplified and competitive tax and regulatory structure. As I mentioned, we've taken some of those steps. And one of the things we're going to have to do in the difficult fiscal circumstances that we're facing currently is to stay the course on some of the changes that we've already put in place and be patient. I think they'll pay off. As we take restrictions and a tax burden off our businesses, they'll grow and flourish, and we'll see money flow into our state.
Okay, let's turn to education. Do you support universal preschool education? If so, how would you bring it about? Doctor?
Erica, it's hard to say that I don't support something that's good. It is clearly the case that children can start learning at a very early age, earlier than we currently start them. And it's also well motivated to try to provide these resources to those children who grow up in difficult circumstances, in poverty, and the lower socioeconomic classes, because we know that they start off behind. But we're already paying for about 17 years of public education. There are already concerns that we're not paying enough and that we're not inputting enough. So where does it stop? Where does the taxpayer's responsibility stop in terms of funding education? If we're going to start 2 or 3 years early, maybe the taxpayer could stop 2 or 3 years earlier at the back end. So how do we pay for it? It's a wonderful idea. How do we pay for it?
Early childhood education is so important to the success and good outcomes for children going through our educational system. If we spend just a little bit more of our permanent land grant fund in the early childhood education years, then those children will be ready when they get to kindergarten, and they will be able to be the same level as other kids who have had that opportunity. We have parents as first teachers where it doesn't cost very much, but some materials, books, and training on how to use some of these materials will help young people in those early years when they are most influential of learning, and they can be more successful as they go through high school onto vocational job training or even college. So we will be able to drop our rate of people not graduating and improve that so that they will be able to be more successful.
We'll move on now, Joanne, to an environmental question, but also an economic one. How would you allocate increasingly scarce water resources?
Well, they're doing programs in Santa Fe and Albuquerque where they are assessing businesses, the city, and then also residential consumption of water. And we are finding that we can improve their conservation by having lower flow toilets and shower heads, and then also being able to assess time of day and things like that of when parks are being watered. So if Albuquerque and Santa Fe can do that, we should be able to do that across the state, and then help the areas also make sure that agriculture will be able to use new technology to use drip systems in watering their plants, maybe even going to hemp, which is a low water usage or needing plant.
Ideas about how to generate more water are physically impossible, but we have to focus on the water that we have. One of the things that we do need to do is prevent adjoining states from stealing our water. And what that goes to principally is providing additional funding to the Attorney General's office to defend the constant stream of lawsuits that attempt to take our water. And we're embroiled in that with Texas now. Unfortunately, we're always underfunded compared to them, and we always lose. Conserving water also goes to funding improved water infrastructure. 2 years ago, we put $90 million in capital outlay funding towards that purpose, and we need more. I would point people's attention to an idea that's being used in Arizona and in California as well now. And it's brought up in the report released by the Utton Center at the law school at UNM recently, and that's the idea of water banks. Water banks that make a commodity of water, similar to what she was saying just a minute ago.
Okay, let's turn to energy. How should the state promote renewable energy? If so, how? Doctor?
Thank you. There are a lot of great things that we'd like to do, and I wish it were the case that a significant amount of our energy could come from renewable sources. We have done things to make that happen. When you say promote, I think what you really mean is subsidize. And so what we have done is subsidize this effort, and it's created some problems. So we've subsidized in two ways. Number one, we've given tax breaks to those who can install solar systems on their homes, and we've required electric companies to buy their electricity. In the end, what that's going to do is force higher rates onto customers in business and in lower socioeconomic classes to pay for it. We have a lot of things to pay for, and important things like education, health care, and water. I don't think our state can afford to further subsidize renewable energy.
Joanne?
I think it's one of the most crucial things we need to be investing in. We have great climate, we have 300 days of sunshine. Solar is a valuable product that we can improve on and make sure that people can have more jobs because of renewable solar energy, as well as wind and geothermal. These are things that will help our environment be cleaner and our air protect both. And we need to not be so dependent on oil and gas for our economy and for helping our educational system. We need to expand our solar and maybe even have it where there's more competition between the electric companies and have more people that will be able to provide solar and sell it on the open market.
For our next question, we move to healthcare. Joanne, how would you improve access to healthcare, especially mental health care, in New Mexico?
Behavioral health care has suffered greatly in the past few years because of political actions that have decimated the providers that were in our state. We need to, now that that company hasn't been able to make enough money off of our health care providing, the providers that were here should be supported and brought back and given compensation for what they suffered, and make it so that we can have more counseling companies and providers throughout our state, especially in rural areas where it's really hard for people to attain treatment. But on healthcare as a whole, we should look at the Health Securities Act, where we can, as a state, negotiate for better prices on pharmaceuticals, and also to provide so that doctors can make more money as far as bringing in more young people as doctors and professions.
Since I've been in the legislature, that's 6 years, we've done a lot to expand access to health care. Medicaid's been dramatically expanded. Access to health care through that mechanism has been expanded. In addition, the Affordable Care Act has put another 40 or 50,000 people in the state who did not previously have insurance, now have coverage. For all its faults, we have expanded access to health care. So I think the question really goes to how do we provide additional access to mental health care? And I think there are two facets to that. And first of all, I would suggest that we need to take a set percentage of Medicare revenues and designate them to mental health care. And we need to beef up the amount of money that's available so that providers can migrate into the state and provide the care that we need desperately. Number two, we need to ensure that we have better recourse, that our judges can mandate mentally ill people to get care. We took a step in the last legislature in the AOT Act, Senator Papen's bill, in which we can require mentally ill people to get care. Following
up on that, what are your expectations for the future of Medicare in New Mexico? Medicaid. Where's the funding going to come from?
The future of Medicaid, the Medicaid is going to go on. We've recently expanded Medicaid dramatically. The problem that we have is that the federal government paid for 100% of that increase for the first several years. Now the time has come that we must start assuming our share. And we're going to have to assume an additional $40 million a year for the next several years. Where do we get the money? Well, that's not determined, but I think we'll meet that demand by some mechanism. One of the things that we're going to have to do, and I believe, in order to meet that demand, is to reform Medicaid. And one of the things that I think we can do to continue to offer the expanded access and yet spread our dollars as good as possible, as well as possible, is to require a system of small copays for when the patients see the doctor, when they get their lab tests, and when they get their medications. This will improve utilization.
Joanne?
I think with the Health Securities Act being able to negotiate for cheaper pharmaceuticals, that will reduce a lot of the costs and the money that is spent, so that we would have more for providing care instead of just to the pharmaceuticals. And that would make it so it's more affordable for everyone. We would be able to get more people throughout the state to then be part of the program, and we would be able to share those costs.
Joanne, are you in favor of a professional legislature with legislators being paid a salary? Yes or no, and why?
The legislature already, I think, the legislators are professional. Even though they are volunteer, they care about New Mexico. And if we did pay a small salary, we would have to make sure that it was tied to an ethics commission that would regulate, how many days of the year legislators would meet, and make sure that all legislators participated year-round, not just during the session. The interim committees are an important part of what happens at the session. And so if they are going around the state with these meetings to hear from the people and what the problems are and what some of the solutions are, then we will have a much better result when we have bills in the legislative session being passed. That being said, if they are being paid, even now when they're not getting a salary, people devote a lot of their time and their lives to participating in the interim committees.
Thank you, Fred. The reason you're asking the question and the reason that this is an issue at all is because I introduced this legislation at the last legislative session. It hasn't been introduced in about 20 years. Obviously, I support the legislation. When communities grow up, we stop having volunteer fire departments and police departments and teachers, and we start paying for professionalism. The job of a legislator has outgrown the volunteer system. We have an over $6 million budget, and it's complicated. And so we need to improve performance by paying for that. Number two, every legislator currently has a conflict of interest because they're dependent upon a source of revenue. It may be their retirement funds, it may be their industry, and so that creates conflicts of interest in terms of how they're going to vote. And finally, we have a whole ream. 80% of our populace cannot participate in this process because it's not paid. The result is like a poll tax. It limits participation in the political process.
Thank you. Dr. McMillan, where do you stand on gas and oil exploration in the state?
Erica, I'm not sure I understand the question. We've been exploring for oil and gas for decades. It's a third of our economy. We explore for it, we harvest it, and I support continued safe exploration for these resources. I think technology has gotten us to the point now that we can harvest oil and gas reserves in a safe fashion. Technology now allows us to drill horizontally. We don't have to drill fresh holes every time we go looking, and this decreases the footprint on the landscape. The technology's evolved a lot, and so I favor continued exploration. It's a critical part of our economy.
Joanne?
I agree that technology has improved, but that technology isn't always safe, and we can't always make sure that we aren't going to have leaks into our water table, which is so precious to us. So I believe that it should be very much regulated and made sure that we do it very carefully, and that communities have a voice in whether or not they would like to have oil exploration or development in their town. It also makes sure that our water table and what we do, we can concentrate more on renewable energy sources rather than continuing with the oil and gas. And when we do have gas exploration or excavation, the extra burn-off of the gas should also be regulated and made sure that we get paid for that.
We have time for one more question. Joanne, we'll begin with you. How would you improve our secondary school system?
One of the first things we need to do is reduce the testing all through elementary through high school. And we need to make sure that kids and teachers aren't being so stressed. It's just taking a lot of money, because that costs a lot, to have the testing done, and then also the time and effort. Teachers are having to teach to the test instead of what is important. So we need to make sure that teachers also get the salaries they deserve, and that we have smaller class sizes.
Oh, thank you, Fred. One of the things we need to do, which we've been trying to do for several years in the legislature, is to pass the third grade reading bill so that our high school students can actually read, and they can actually read at grade level. We offer that reform for the sole purpose of improving secondary education. Kids who can't read at third grade level are doomed to fall further behind the further they go in school. So it's quite clear to me that one of the first things we can do is ensure that our kids can read, and it begins at the third grade. I agree with Joanne about less testing. We need less testing. We need less evaluation of everything except the student. We do need occasional testing to give the student feedback about where they're falling short and how they can be helped. The students need to be held accountable to those tests. Finally, we need to bring job skills training back into high school. The last 2 years of high school can be spent teaching kids a trade that they can earn a living with. Kids don't need 4 years of high school algebra, not all of them, or high school mathematics.
Dr. Terry McMillan, Joanne Ferrary, thank you both for being with us for this Election 2016 Forum, and a big thank you as well to the League of Women Voters.
And on behalf of the League, thank you both for coming. And today is the first day of early voting, so all of us go out and vote.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for
Thank you
being
both.
with us.
Thank you.
Have a great week.